It's Andre Banks with Information Age Financial Solutions, coming to you with a fantastic article I read from Freight Waves. A great purge is happening in the small trucking industry. And there's a lot of people who recently opened up in the last, I should say, during the pandemic in the last couple of years, trucking businesses, and it was all the rave. But all the rave comes with a cost, and apparently that things are changing for the worse. And when I mean for the worse is that a lot of the small businesses that might have been started during the pandemic or thought was a good opportunity because they may saw a need of truckers because they needed so much packages to be delivered and so much different things going on, and moving those, just moving the different packages and different aspects of it because we had the shutdown. The ramifications are now starting to show that surge is over. Great article to look at. I'm going to put aside a link inside the description as always. Let's dive right in. Start with the title. Great Purge is pushing small truckers out of business at an unprecedented rate. Chris Tucker needed to move some hot tubs. It seemed like a good gig for his network of small truckers. The Winchester, Kentucky-based owner Full of Coverage Freight, a truck brokerage, recently advertised to truck drivers on a load board that had a shipment of hot tubs headed from Seattle to a small town in the middle of Wisconsin. The rate came out to under $2 a mile, which Tucker thought was low. He expected drivers to haggle with his company to get paid at least $2.50 a mile, or about $1,000 more for the gig. Instead, his office was slammed with dozens of phone calls and hundreds of texts clamoring for the hot tub job, exactly at the rate advertised. It's not an ideal situation for America's 2 million truck drivers. Too many truck drivers for the amount of work available means lower and lower pay. During the last major trucking recession in 2019, hundreds of trucking companies delivered bankruptcy, unable to cover the cost of running a trucking company with deflating rates. The last few months have made Tucker believe trucking is about to enter the Great Purge, or another spate of major bankruptcies. He predicted in June 10th, Facebook post on the Rate Per Miles Masters Group. You can click on those links right here, which hosts about 33,000 trucking professionals, that the many truck drivers who flooded the industry in unprecedented truck volumes would have to shut down their operations. Ill-prepared brokers would also face the same doom, he wrote. I don't think there's enough freight out there to justify their existence anymore, Tucker told Freightways this week. The Great Purge, as he calls it, the Great Purge appears to be underway already. In May, net motor carrier revocations hit a record high, according to an analyst of federal data by FTR Transportation Intelligence. January and March of this year were the previous records. Net revocations of trucking authority, shows the tracks here. 4,000 distributed to a lack of design processing agents. At the above, the FTR graph shows revocations of trucks authorities reached a record high in May, hitting nearly 9,300. The yellow bar represents some 4,000 revocations from entities that failed to follow required form and may be considered aberrations in the data. Even counting that out, though, the net revocations peaked. Small fleets as tiny as one driver comprised the bulk of these shuttering truck companies. Avery Vise, who is the vice president of trucking at the FTR, said many of these drivers would join larger fleets rather than get flushed out of the market completely. Okay. The following months will likely break May's records, representing more fleets fleeing the market. The revocations represented above were likely filed before the spring's diesel surge and spot rate decline, Vise said. It's an about face from just a few months ago when small truck drivers were still bringing major cash. Here's what happened: 2020 to 2022. All the cool kids are becoming owner-operators, and that's why I was reading this article, because it seemed like everybody on the street was just telling me they're going to start a trucking business, and this is the next new wave, and that's why it piqued my attention. And when everybody's on one side of the fence, and talking about the rave without any of the consequences that seem logical, that, hey, this cost of trucking, you're competing against people, you haven't been doing this experience before, and you're just not going to run a business where you don't have that experience, but you're competing against other people. And trucks are living things. They have to be constantly fuel, then fuel costs go up. A host of number of things that logically people would think about, but that's we don't function always in a logical sense. Retailers were caught flat-footed with empty warehouses and had to quickly scale up to meet consumer demand for exercise equipment, computer monitors, and yes, toilet paper. New trucking fleets poured into the market to profit from these sky-high rates. From July 2020 to now, almost 195,000 new carriers have entered the market, according to the buys of FTR. About 70 of these new carriers were just one truck. The previous record 23-month period saw just 86,000 new carriers. The flood of new carriers was felt around the industry. Tucker Full Coverage Freight, which is an independent agency with global trends, confirmed that through his own experiences, his office was flooded with calls from small truckers who had set up their authority only a few days prior. We saw this developing 18 months ago, Tucker said. We could support this artificial introduction of all these carriers just because of all this activity going on. The unusual marker of the last 2 years isn't just that rates and volume skyrocketed, but there was where they skyrocketed the spot market. The spot market usually accounts for 10 to 20% of the overall trucking market. Vice said that share may have climbed to as high as 50% in the height of COVID buying craziness. Well said. And he does a chart here. It looks how much it hides. The rate to move a load on the spot market soared. Each month of 2021 seemed to break a new record in the rate to move a dry van, with the peak hitting in January 2022. It was a fantastic time to be a small trucker who would pick up spot jobs easily. Contract rates didn't climb at the same pace. That's best measured by the outbound tender reject index, which shows how much contract freight is getting rejected. Unlike, every other industry, you don't need to honor your trucking contracts. If you have a fleet that can make more money moving spot loads, you're free to do that. Of course, keep in mind that your customer might not be so happy to give you a fair rate when spot rates inevitably crash again, and you're struggling to make ends meet. Good point. And it shows a decline here. Around 20% of all contract freight was getting rejected last spring, even in late December 2021 and early January 2022. The rejection rate was more than 20%. The spike in spot rates meant more capacity on the smaller trucker side. Trucking companies with more than 100 trucks didn't grow all nearly the same pace as the part of the market with one-man bands. Vice estimated about 6 to 7% of capacity shifted from those fleets of 100 plus drivers to those under 100 in the past 2 years. Spring 2022, a collapse in spot rate means a surge in diesel. As you could safely expect in trucking, the good times ran out. In March, spot rates began a free fall at a stunning rate. Mason Danoff, sorry I messed up this person's name, is the senior economist at Uber Freight, compared the month-over-month drop in spot rates, excluding fuel. In March and April, rates dropped by 30 cents compared to the months prior. Rates dropped another 20 cents in May. These declines outpaced the previous record decline of 15 cents. Meanwhile, the contract side of the market is regaining territory. The rejection rate is for contract rate, which loomed at more than 20% earlier this year, is now sitting at 7.7%. Danoff said freight contracts that were negotiated in early 2022 took into account high spot rates. They allow big trucking companies, which aren't as active in the spot market as smaller ones, to secure higher rates from their customers. The new small truckers that flooded the market in the last few years were less likely to have sort of long-term relationships with big retailers and manufacturers. They lost out on any bump in contracts rates earlier this year. Now, Vice says that spot accounts for about 30% of the market. Danoff estimated that number was 18%. Both indicate a trucking economy that's shifting back from the volatile spot world to steadier contracts, even though it means that some smaller truck companies will get shuttered in the process. What we're seeing is a shift of the market back to traditional split, Vice said. It could take a long time, however. Even more challenging small trucking companies is the soaring cost of doing business. According to a report from loadboardtruckstock.com, it's now 51% more expensive to run a trucking company in 2002 than last year. Smaller carriers are more likely to shoulder that burden. The staggering cost of diesel is the most marked cost increase, with the smallest fleets struggling to keep up. Some truck drivers have shut down simply because they couldn't afford diesel anymore. David Guzman of San Antonio is one of them. The way the rates are, you have to run twice as hard to make ends meet, he told FreightWaves in April. I can't help but feel for my fellow truck drivers. Equipment has also become more expensive. Truck drivers who bought their trucks in 2021 are paying off loans on trucks that might be 2 or 3 times higher than normal. The cost of repairs are also pricier, up nearly 9% in late 2021 from late 2020. Such expenses are getting subsidized by ultra-high spot rates. Aren't getting subsidized by ultra-high spot rates anymore. Others believe that this winnowing out of small truckers resembles something spookier than a mere shift from spot to contract. This week, FreightWaves CEO Craig Fuller wrote the issues plaguing trucking may resemble a larger economic recession. Okay, big R word, recession. Ocean volumes are beginning to collapse, reflecting record inflation, big box retailers that are already full up on inventory. What consumer spending is still growing is on the travel and the entertainment side, which doesn't move as much freight. Well said. What's going to happen is going to be tough. Tucker, the freight broker, said it's going to be painful for a lot of people. Very few people will be left standing. This is his own words for a person who's been in the business. There's one way out for small truckers, but that opportunity is closing. Vice said many of the small truckers who gave up their authority rejoined a big fleet as company drivers. Others leased their truck back to one of the mega carriers, where they can benefit from fuel surcharges to underwrite big diesel payments. Those drivers might be the lucky ones. Those who already sold their trucks were still able to take advantage of the high used truck prices, which are now quickly declining. What's more, there may not be many more jobs available at big carriers. Non-supervisory truck employment hit a record high in April. The latest available data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Vice said he closely monitored these numbers to see if the trucking fleets decide themselves they have too many drivers. Vice is still positive on the current market, saying that trucking is shifting from spot freight dominated by small truckers back to contract loads dominated by big carriers. Pointing to pent-up manufacturing demand and signs of resiliency on the consumer side, he said he's fairly optimistic and will muddle through this year without a recession. It's wishful thinking. Not all are feeling so chipper. Tom Halbert, Chief of Financial Officer of Transportation Insurance Agency Reliance Partners, said current rates can't match the new cost structure of running a trucking company. Fuel, equipment, and labor has become too expensive, and these problems are matching a slowdown in job creation, and the Federal Reserve struggled to tame inflation. The party's over, Albert said. Do you work in the trucking industry? Email the offer. This person at FreightWaves with your experience. Wow. Rachel Permack wrote this article. If you're in the trucking business and things are changing, shifting directly, especially if you started trucking in the last couple of years, because there was a new wave of entrepreneurs, especially in trucking. Take a look at this article, read it. I went through it quickly. Might have jumbled up a couple parts. Definitely worth your time. Put the link inside the description. Until my next video for Information Age Financial Solutions, I'm out.